The Australian housing market is designed to be expensive.
We added 20 million people to this country and we only added one new city to it. We could add more cities which would drive down house prices, but more importantly there are political incentives. Sooner or later demographics suggest that there will be a shift happening. I can see a future 6 elections from now where we will not have Labour or Liberal Prime Ministers anymore.
For a young Australian to own real estate in this country is near impossible.
If I'm looking at a 22-year-old today, I see a couple of positive developments for you on the horizon that are largely linked with baby boomers dying.
Simon Kuestenmacher is one of the world-leading demographers. He explains how major social and economic shifts actually happen, using data maps and long-term population trends. He's the co-founder of the Demographics Group alongside Bernard Salt, advising governments and major institutions on how society is changing. So when he says the system is designed this way, and that politics follow incentives, the real question isn't if things change, it's who's ready when they do.
I would claim that the next 2 years in Queensland are the single most important years in the next century. None of the other cities, Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, have the capacity to add infrastructure at this scale because
Anyone listening that's investing in property, in land, in development, we probably got about 15 years. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Unemployable podcast. Today we're going to be talking about numbers, we're going to be talking about stats, and we're going to be talking about demographics. And we have someone special here to talk about that named Simon Kuestenmacher. I had to practice that a few times. And we're going to be talking about why Australia works the way it does. And he's one of the most famous demographers in the country. He's a data influencer with over 700,000 followers across his platforms, 40 to 50 million views a month. He's a famous speaker, does over 100 conferences per year, and he's a co-founder of Demographics Group alongside Bernard Salt. Simon, thank you so much for being here.
Absolute pleasure to be here.
Carson, Shannon, thanks for lining this up. I think it was you, Carson, was it? That got this one on. So I think he's winning. Winning on that front. Shannon,
It's got to be a hard one to beat too.
this is going to be an action-packed pod, guys. Like there's going to be a lot of information in here. Like I said, Simon's one of the most famous demographers in the country. We're talking off camera and on the Australian housing market. And this is a very, very hot topic at the moment for all of us Aussies living here. And one of the comments that were mentioned was that the Australian housing market is designed to be expensive, right? So it's designed this way. And I was like, what do we mean by that? So I want to start off by asking that question. Why is Australia designed for our housing market to be so expensive? And it's on purpose.
There's so many things that feed into this. The first thing has to do with geography, old-fashioned geography. We didn't change the geography of Australia much. If you think back to the end of the Second World War, Australia was home to 7 million people. We lived in whatever cities we lived in. Since then, we added 20 million people to this country, and we only added one new city to it. And that is the Gold Coast. We sit in it right now. It is an exceptional city because it is so rare. In the meantime, we should have added 6 or 7 Gold Coasts instead just one. But we didn't. So we squeeze more and more people into just the same amount of cities. And we then wonder that house prices escalate and go up. Yes, these cities continue to sprawl outwards. Our Australian cities are absolutely massive beasts with super low population density. On average, an Australian city has a population density 4 times lower than an equally sized European city. So we pay for heaps more infrastructure in this country. We just need to do this. We could add more cities, which would drive down house prices. But more importantly, there are political incentives to drive house prices up. Initially, giving housing wealth to people by allowing them to buy land and ensure that this land accrues in value, you create a middle class. You create a cohort that has money out of nowhere. And so there are more winners than losers for quite a while. And you now have, of course, banks that like this. Banks do nothing but handing out mortgages. So they enjoy this because if you hand out bigger mortgages, you get more money back. So that's nice for the banks. Then, of course, you do have political parties that are very much interested in votes, and they are highly aware that most voters, and we don't care about all of the people that live in Australia, we only care about voters as politicians, and only 64% of the people in this country vote, because the rest are under 18 or they don't have a passport. And so out of this 64% of people, only a quarter are renters. They're essentially all young people. So why would you worry about those young people, those few young people? If you were to make housing cheaper through policy settings, you'd have 3/4 of the voters up against you. So you don't do this. We learned from Bill Shorten, who kind of tried to do this, and then he managed to lose the unlosable election. That's a dumb move, because so far more people benefit from high house prices. And turning this around is politically difficult. It is thinkable and possible. But of course, you also have the states against you these days, because the states get about 50 to 60%, depending on the state, of their income from property taxes. So if you were to lower property taxes to drive down house prices, you would need to find some sort of income source. And that would be fought most certainly. So we probably just stay in this status quo until we completely run against a wall, because it is the politically easiest way forward.
And do you see this? This is how it's been in the past, and this is how it is now, and in the future, in the near future. Do you see this?
Well, so this is where we need to discuss the term near future, because I think in the long run, sooner or later, demographics suggest that there will be a shift happening. Because when I say politics want housing to be expensive, this is the two major parties that want housing to be expensive. I can see a future in the medium term, meaning 6 elections from now, so 18 years, where we will not have Labour or Liberal prime ministers anymore. The forecast is pretty simple, because we look at the primary votes cast for third parties. In 1987, less than 2% of us voted for a third party. At the last election, a third of us, 33% of us, voted for a third party. And so after every election, we run this thing called the Australian Election Study, a riveting read on a Saturday night. And this has a very simple takeaway message. We interview 3,000 people there in great detail about their voting behavior. The quick takeaway is everyone under age 45 hates Labour and Liberal. So that means for every election, we kill 3 years worth of loyal Labour and Liberal voters, and we introduce 3 years worth of I hate Labour and Liberal. That eventually tilts the power balance against Labour and Liberal. So the big question then is, who will take over? Will it finally be Clive Palmer's turn? Will it be the Greens? Will it be Pauline? And my best bet is that the party in power in 18 years' time does not exist yet. This is not too crazy of a forecast, by the way, because we've seen this all over Europe play out. The reason Labour and Liberal are still strong in Australia today is mostly in our voting system. We put a gun to your head and say, you better vote, compulsory voting. So this is why 90% of us vote. In the US, voting isn't compulsory, 60% vote. So I'd say it's quite likely to assume that if voting wasn't compulsory, 60% of us would vote, more or less. The people that we would lose would most likely be largely Labour and Liberal voters, because it is the middle of the road people that are a bit meh about politics. The fringe is always motivated, so they would come. And then, of course, we have preferential voting as well, where our votes for the small parties gets handballed to the big parties by a preferential system. And so if we were to get rid of this, we'd already have Labour and Liberal dead. So I would say the two major parties right now are already on life support, and it is largely linked to housing. Because if you wanted to guarantee your long-term survival as a party, you would progressively introduce policy favoring the under 45s, which very much would introduce gigantic renter rights. It would introduce policy shifts to make housing cheaper, so you don't tax income, by the way, either. So you stop taxing income, you start taxing wealth and consumption in one way or another. This would very much be in favor of the young people against the old people, but it is political suicide at the moment. So therefore, absolutely neither of the major parties are touching it. And I'm, of course, very much looking forward to be invited back to this podcast in 18 years to be able to tell you, told you so.
So basically, boys, right, and anyone listening that's investing in property and land and development, We probably got about 15 years because you definitely don't want to be touching on the fringe of 18.
Taxes are gone.
Yeah, yeah. Because one of the questions I had is like, based on the data, like in my opinion, young Australians are locked out of the property space, right? Unless you're getting some generational wealth, or you got a very high income earning job, or you have parents that are going to help you. For a young Australian to own real estate in this country is near impossible. But in 18 years, you're saying that it might change, which kind of makes sense, to be honest with you, right? Because obviously Liberal and Labor have had a tight hold, right, in Parliament for a very, very long time. And I've been seeing so many different independents, right? Like when you go vote now and you open up your paper, it's a scroll, right, of all these different types of independents, right? But what if you're a young Australian now, right? What do you do, in your opinion, right? Like, yeah, okay, this may happen. I've heard a guy on a podcast, say that we're going to be good in 18 years. Well, in 18 years, that young 25-year-old is not a young 25-year-old anymore. They're a 43-year-old just trying to get into the property market. So what, in your opinion, can they do, or what do you think the government will do to try and incentivize them? I've seen today or yesterday, a couple of these MPs posting now that there's a 5% deposit on first mortgage, first time home buyers, and no lenders mortgage insurance, as an example. So that's a bit of an incentive. Do you see other things happening?
So the couple of questions that you ask. The first one is look into the policy crystal ball.
Yep.
And when I see something like the extended first home buyer guarantee, that is not a policy shift in the sense that we try to make housing cheaper. What we try to enable is that more people somehow find a way to jump on the property ladder. It's a different. There's a small difference there. That's the status quo continues for longer. That's what that policy is. It does not drive down house prices. It takes a bit of cost away that you don't need to pay the LMI. That's it. So I'm not too big of a fan about this. There are also still caps on the property they can purchase in there, so it impacts the lower end of the market, which is very welcome because they need most certainly a lot of help. The other question then is, well, how optimistic or pessimistic should I be as a young person when I look at purchasing my first home? And we'll assume that you need to buy your first home roughly when you start your family, which is early 30s on average, thereabouts. And so for the millennials in the early 30s that are trying to buy a home in the next few years, I have absolutely no hope for you. There's no house price collapse. There is no things won't get easier for you. Full stop. If I'm looking at a 22-year-old today who would only need to buy a house in about a decade, I see a couple of positive developments for you on the horizon that are largely linked with baby boomers dying, to be fair. Because what will happen once the baby boomer cohort dies? First and foremost, these baby boomers now largely live in the big blocks in the middle suburbs of our big capital cities. They're not downsizing. The whole Noosa is a real place. Of course, some people downsize, but overall, the downsizing narrative is much exaggerated in Australia. Australians tell you things like, I want to be carried out of the family home. It's the real Australian dream. Yeah,
I live here in a box.
I guess it's downsizing into the box then. But ultimately, they don't downsize. Ultimately, they stay put. And so that means only once the last parent dies, and that's mom, because she's 4 years younger, 4 years longer life expectancy than dad. Once she dies, we unlock the baby boomer property. In some cases, this quarter-acre block in the middle suburbs will be sold to a cashed-up family, as is. But more often than not, we will bulldoze this quarter-acre block. We will put 2, 3, 28 crappy townhouses on top, as much as we can squeeze in there. And so that all of a sudden creates much more housing supply in a desirable market that ultimately will drive down house prices. But that is about a decade away because that's when baby boomers start dying at scale. So in a sense, if I'm 22 at the moment, I can be much more optimistic about my future first home purchase than a 32-year-old can be today. Because they don't need a house in their early 30s, they need it in their early 40s in 10 years, they need it now when they're in their early 30s.
Now, that makes sense, right? Because obviously everybody, most people want to live close to the beach, and then they start getting priced out of the market and they go, into the outer suburbs as an example. And you could see that happening now, especially around the Gold Coast and the areas where Shannon and Carson are developing, right? They're an hour away from the Gold Coast now. They're building, communities and Westfield shopping centers and these types of things. But what's your opinion in regards to inner city living, right? So we've got, Gold Coast is such a unique market in my opinion because we're stuck between a beach and the mountains, right? We've got this stretch, and then that's that, right? You're either going in behind the mountains or you're going far north or even more west. So what's your opinion on kind of that market, that inner city kind of close to the beach market? Because we've been seeing prices here on the Gold Coast just keep going and going and going. Like I look back 6-7 years ago and go like, why the hell didn't I buy more and more property? Because you look back and you just go, oh my God, it was so cheap.
Yeah.
And everyone talks about Gold Coast, and I don't want to talk about Gold Coast the whole time. But I guess specifically at the moment, because we live here, there's quite a lot of interest and we're investing here, is the boom and bust town, right? A lot of big buildings that get built, and then they're for the tourists. But there's been a big change, right? There's a lot of owner-occupied stock that has been built. There's, 10, 15, $20 million apartments now that are being purchased, and it's a different demographic that's coming here. Do you feel like that's a sustainable model moving forward?
Let's look ahead for the next decade or so, and there is absolutely nothing that holds the Gold Coast back. The Gold Coast increasingly becomes a CBD in its own right, meaning it creates jobs in its own right that attracts further population. You increasingly are a magnet for international students. They keep coming. You continue to be an overflow destination for Brisbane. These are people who can't afford a family home in Brisbane. It's slightly cheaper in the Gold Coast, so this population flows over. You remain a retirement destination to a certain degree. So these things are not changing in the coming decade. This will continue to push growth into the Gold Coast. On top of this, there is the little thing called the Olympics looming in the background, which will further drive market recognition of the Gold Coast, of Southeast Queensland as a whole. The Olympics, if you play your cards right, and this is a big if at this moment, and you utilize the Olympics to improve the infrastructure connectivity between the 3 or really 4 hubs that make up Southeast Queensland as a whole can become the best connected conurbation mega urban city in this country by a long shot. If you view Southeast Queensland as one unit, you're much better than Melbourne and Sydney, because you have 3 international airports like a string of pearls along the coastline. You have a big regional airport in Toowoomba. If you then connect the CBDs with really decent infrastructure, you can have population and jobs flow back and forth. This is a hyper productive economy that you can set up if you get your infrastructure game right.
Well, that was my next question. You said play your cards right. So you said cards with a plural. So is it just infrastructure and what else? And what type of infrastructure are you talking about?
I'm talking exclusively about transport infrastructure, connecting the different hubs between the cities. Of course, a successful city needs to have schools, hospitals, decent office buildings, decent, spare time offerings, but you have that with the nature and the beach and everything anyways. But I'm talking about the transport. Remember that the Council of Mayors in Southeast Queensland only applied for the Olympics with the secret goal in mind to improve the connectivity of the area. This was never about the Olympics. This was an infrastructure ploy. And you now have the games in less than 7 years. That means an infrastructure project needs to be shovel ready in, let's say, 2 years, 2.5 years, because only if you can guarantee that this thing will be up and running by the day of the opening ceremony will you get any bloody money for it. If you don't have your projects ready in 2.5 years, you know that you miss the opportunity of a lifetime. And that could be a real problem for the region, because then you would simply create population growth in each of those individual hubs in Southeast Queensland. You have terrible connectivity between them that creates permanent bottlenecks around the whole system, and life will just suck a bit more. And you don't want that in your town. So without being too dramatic here, I would claim that the next 2 years in Queensland are the single most important years in the next century. This is a make it or break it time. Get your infrastructure into the ground right now. As a premier, you need to be very, very bold and bulldoze over any kind of minority concerns that says like, oh, the tram turns takes a left, takes a right, this thing. No, you need to think about decades or really a century forward here to make this region future ready. And none of the other cities, Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, have the capacity to add infrastructure at this scale because we don't get the additional federal funding for infrastructure and so forth. Crucial decade ahead here.
How do you think they're doing?
Oh, not good. So no, at the moment, this might well be a train wreck. At the moment, this might well be a situation where you miss the opportunity of a lifetime. And you mustn't do this. And, I'm, of course, a big fan of sports in Australia. I could not speak more highly of the importance of sports for society in Australia. But the sporting infrastructure is playing a second fiddle to the transport infrastructure when I think about the Olympic Games.
About interstate migration, Southeast Queensland's typically been where people come to retire, and then obviously during COVID, we were selling blocks, sight unseen, and from Melbourne in particular. Are you seeing that trend like decrease now since COVID, or how are you seeing that interstate formation?
Demographically speaking, you'd say retirees how do retirees differ from other people on the housing market? Other people on the housing market are shackled to a certain degree by their place of work. Even if they're a knowledge worker, they still need to go to the office once or twice a week. So they stay within a magical 2-hour drive time radius around their CBD. They don't venture outwards. All of a sudden, you are becoming a retiree. You can live wherever the hell you want. So you choose sun, lifestyle, beach. That's what we have here in the Gold Coast. So people choose that. The baby boomers are only now starting to retire at scale because, yes, they're still already of retirement age, but they're only sliding into retirement. Very few boomers do the Gold Watch on Friday, golf course until you drop type retirement. They scale back the hours in their 60s. They go on this big Rhine River cruise in the middle of the year. Whatever they do, but they still stay attached to work for a little bit. So you throw them into retirement eventually, and more of them will come and pick the Gold Coast. And that only goes up. So it's part of my narrative that for the next decade, nothing holds the Gold Coast back. Everything pushes for more growth here. So you'll see, of course, property go up, which drives up market prices because it's more expensive to build up than out on a square meter basis, as you guys know better than anyone else. And so that's where prices will go.
Can I just ask you questions and think a bit broader? Like WA has had a big boom at the moment and it's settled a little bit, but also we look for opportunities in the future, stuff to hold and buy. And what about Victoria at the moment? There's a lot of policy change and people are talking about land taxes and whatnot. What's your thoughts on those other areas?
Yeah, so in Victoria, special case in Melbourne. So I'm absolutely certain that very, very soon Melbourne will be Australia's most affordable capital city. Lowest house prices. And you will not stop Victoria yapping on about it, the Premier at least. And that has to do with the type of housing that we're building. First and foremost, Melbourne is the fastest growing city in Australia. 100,000 people per year compared to 80,000 people in Sydney, for example. This is huge growth. Each of those people need to be housed, and building out, bulldozing land, greenfield development site. The development cost is, about a third per square meter compared to medium density, high density in the city, roughly, more or less. So you have heaps of people that need to be housed. Melbourne has no physical boundaries hemming it in. In Sydney, we now hit the Blue Mountains. So you can't build outwards. You need to build up. That drives up costs. Melbourne can sprawl until it hits bloody Adelaide.
Yeah.
So there is nothing that stops urban sprawl in Melbourne, which will drive house prices down. That looks very good and refreshing on paper. However, it brings a couple of problems with it. It means that you need, if you spread your people across a bigger canvas, you need more infrastructure. which is not a great proposition for the broke state of Victoria. So
which is why they're having so much policy change at the moment and land taxes and
exactly. So they need
some of that
to
loss.
create money in some way or form. And you'll see, because we complain so much about Victoria in terms of the taxation is more difficult. It's hard to do business there. But at the moment, people are still coming into Melbourne at the highest rate across the country. So that still seems to work. And the market will react accordingly. They will react by more and more greenfield sites. You've seen that the Victorian Public Service made it abundantly clear that they are not going to force anyone back into the office, because if you have people, and we sometimes forget how big Melbourne is, people out in Melton, in Wyndham, in wherever they are a long while away from the CBD where the jobs are clustered. So these people will fight tooth and nail to not have to go back to the office. And nobody will force them to do so, because also the state doesn't want them on the roads, because the constrained traffic system would collapse. So this is the working from home capital of Australia, will be Melbourne by necessity. It will also be the cheapest city. Is this good? Is this bad? I don't know. And you guys need to decide what this means for a investment decision, because the demand will be there for housing. Will this be an attractive investment? Who knows? Because the most attractive investment is not necessarily in the fastest growing area where the most people are. It is the rarest, most desirable thing in, and then you really don't care whether it's a sexy, cool, up and coming suburb, or whether it's a small town where you desperately need housing and it's not that sexy.
That's why I backed the Gold Coast.
But it's a sexy place.
Right, a sexy place. He said sexy a few times. So I want to talk a little bit about immigration, right? Let's talk about immigration in regards to what is happening with immigration. For the people that don't know, we just hear, oh, there's record immigration coming in. And what's happening with immigration? Where is it coming from? And do you feel like it'll be here to stay for quite some time?
Awesome question. Big complex answer.
Couple
So,
questions here.
a couple of figures to kind of like anchor this in place. Australia is a migration nation. Most of our population growth, around 70%, is imported from overseas. Only 30% is homegrown, meaning more babies born than people die. So without migration, we would have very, very little population growth. That's the lay of the land. We got used to ever higher migration in essentially 3 steps since the Sydney Olympics. And we ended up by taking in 62,000 net new migrants each quarter. That translates to 240-something thousand people.
When was this?
This was just before the pandemic.
Yes.
So before the pandemic, we took in about just under 250,000 people per year.
As a country.
As a country, in net terms. Before that, it was a bit less. But this is for a decade before the pandemic, that is kind of what we gotten used to. 250,000 net new migrants. Along comes the pandemic. For the first time since federation, we see negative migration. That means people leave the country because we make it abundantly clear, federal government makes it abundantly clear to temporary visa holders that no financial assistance is going to be handed out, and so they bugger off. That created a dip in migrants, dip in the workforce, and that lasted for a year and a half. And then we took in migrants again. And so that in 2023, 24, we saw extremely high migration intakes. So far that we saw 500,000 net new migrants a year. And people said, guys, this is madness. This is the migration Ponzi scheme in the middle of a housing affordability crisis. This is just political madness. And this makes for very, very attractive populist kind of talking points. But unfortunately, it is utter and complete nonsense if you can do your averages. If you average out the population intake from the beginning of the pandemic until now, with the same amount of time before the pandemic, you see that there was absolutely no change in migration intake. We take in just the same amount of migrants. The reason we took in so many migrants in 2023-24 was simply that we took in 3.5 years worth of international students in 1.5 years.
Who couldn't come here?
So they couldn't come here because they were locked down, and mom and dad wouldn't send them to the world's most locked down city in Melbourne or something like this. So that made it unattractive. But this the university system is hooked on those students for their income, so they took them in as soon as they could. And so that then means they're now filled up. And we know that migration numbers will go down to the pre-pandemic levels again. This is built into the system. But of course, you can happily talk about this as a politician because it is a popular political talking point. The idea the migrants drive up house prices. And this is again where we link migration to housing.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, it sounds logical.
Mm.
We cut migration by 100,000 people a year. These 100,000 people don't need to be housed. That means more housing is available for a cheaper price for Australians. Vote for me. Very, very compelling. Unfortunately, also wrong, because we did see during the pandemic years where we actually see migrants leave in net terms, house prices still go up. And so you go, maybe it's not that. Maybe the market times when they put product to market. Maybe this is not just all the migrants' fault, the housing system that we operate in. But it is a very convenient political talking point, because if high house prices happen to be the fault of migrants, I tick the box of having talked about housing affordability, and then all I need to do is pretend to cut migration, and then I tackled that issue. And so I don't need to go down the rabbit hole of actually explaining why my policies as a Labour or a Liberal Party proactively drive up house prices. So this is just cheap politics. And spoiler alert, and I'm very disappointed that Scott Morrison, that Peter Dutton didn't become Prime Minister, because he promised to cut migration. And I was very, very outspoken and confident that he would most certainly not cut migration. Scott Morrison, when he became Prime Minister or campaigned, he said he would cut migration by 50,000 people, and each year under his leadership saw record high migration intake. This country is hooked on income tax. 52-54% varies each year of our federal income, of our federal tax that we collect as a state is income tax. So that means the treasurer will never ever allow the PM to cut migration. So you must not take any politician even remotely serious if they talk about cutting migration, if they do not at the very same time talk about changing the reliance from income tax to taxing wealth. Which again is of course political suicide, because who wants to have their house taxed, their land taxed? That's not what you want. So I would say the status quo will remain in the future, that we take in 250,000 net new migrants each year for as long as we can, to keep the demographic system young enough so that we slow down the aging of the system. That is thinkable in the foreseeable future, even though winning those migrants over to come to Australia will become increasingly harder as, globally speaking, the population of migration age starts to shrink. That raises the question, what is migration age? In Australia, about 80% of migrants are 18 to 39 years of age. That's because half of the migrants are international students, 18 to 23 or something. And then we take all the skilled migrants as young as possible, because we only wanted to pay them cheap starter wages, and we wanted to be productive worker bees for as long as possible. So we take in 18 to 39-year-olds. This global population of 18 to 39-year-olds is starting to stagnate in for about a decade, and then it starts to decline. Within this shrinking pool of 18 to 39-year-olds, we'll have ever fewer people in the developed countries and more people in the developing economies of this world. So that changes the dynamics. So what I would therefore be willing to forecast is that this is the last decade where we get migrants for free, or where migrants pay for the visas. We will very soon try to entice them through tax cuts or something like this to come to this country, because it is easier to continue to grow the country than to deal with the consequences of an aging or slowing economy. Yeah.
Where are they coming from? Where is the migration coming from around the world?
So in theory, we don't have any kind of target for which countries we take our migrants from. But in reality, there is a bit of geographic shifts in the migration patterns. So we took in heaps of Mediterranean migrants after the end of the Second World War. We had super low unemployment. They had very high unemployment. Makes sense. We had jobs. We needed their labor. Why did we turn our backs on our Italian and Greek friends? Well, we haven't. There are just no young Greeks or Italians left to import to Australia. They don't exist. Europe is running out of young people like crazy. So we therefore take in young people from where they still exist. China is massively shrinking their young population, but it is a gigantic country. So there are plenty of Chinese international students that we could take in, and the same with India, that is actually still growing its young population for quite a while. So this is why we take in people from India and China now. There's no real ethnic goal behind these strategies. That said, lots of universities who are responsible for quite a bit of the migration intake now have a bit of a migration target or so, where they go, it's not a migration target, so we're going to diversify, spread the risk, to seek markets in Latin America and so forth, just be a bit more diverse as a setup. So that spreads the load a bit. But increasingly our migrants will be from India and from the large neighbor states, Philippines and so forth, Indonesia.
And in your opinion, you don't think the migration is propping up the real estate market in this country?
Well, it is to a degree that they need to be housed. That is absolutely true, and therefore they gobble up labor that is needed to build those homes. If I imagine a scenario where we don't take in 100, but we only take 150,000 instead of 250,000 people a year, do I think that housing would become cheaper? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is still by design expensive, and that I see very little evidence of politics trying to proactively make housing cheaper.
And do you think with the by design, because I've said this before, whether I'm correct or not doesn't really matter, but in my belief, I'm not a demographer, right? I just come and pretend like I know what I'm talking about. But in my opinion, the housing prices, most Australians' wealth, like it's a little bit different than the US as an example. US, there's a lot of wealth held in shares and whatnot, whereas Australia predominantly is real estate, right? And I was of the opinion is, if the Australian real estate market did ever collapse, we'd all be in a lot of strife, because there's so much, we were talking about it off camera, paper wealth, equity held in these properties, and that's where a majority of people's wealth are in this country. Do you believe that as well, or is that just a conspiracy theory that I've made up myself?
Very good point. A couple of things here. So first and foremost, whether you as an owner-occupier, whether you live in a box that is worth $1 million or $2 million, it is still the same shitty box. So it doesn't make any difference to your day-to-day life, to your quality of life, how much the box is worth. It is the quality of the box that really matters. Then, of course, in Australia, we obsess about the term called the wealth effect, where because we know that we are rich, because we know this thing that I live in, it was worth $100,000 when I purchased it. Now it's worth $1 million, $2 million. Now you feel richer, and you then spend more money only because you feel richer. We are an extremely high consumption society. We are a lifestyle obsessed people who are very happy to spend. You see this in fun data sets. Economies around the world, when the economy starts to slow down, people stop eating out and so forth, going out for drinks. We don't. We just go, oh, whatever, yes, I got better things to do, and that's at the pub. And we are obsessed about lifestyle here first and foremost. And in order to slow this or to turn this around, we would change the national character. And I don't think that is a quick thing here. So yes, we will definitely continue to consume like crazy.
Are you finding with the international migrants, they're mainly landing in Sydney and Melbourne? And am I right in assuming that, I think I've heard something that Melbourne will actually overtake Sydney in population? Is that right? And when do you think that'll happen?
Well, it's pretty easy. Melbourne and Sydney grow at different rates. So Melbourne adds 20,000 more people each year than Sydney. And so depending on how you draw the boundaries, that'll happen in the next decade or two. Yeah, it's guaranteed. It's written into the future of this country, and it's just bragging rights, so to speak. It's like, who's being called the biggest city, but it doesn't fundamentally change anything. And there is no such thing as a magic number of a city when it starts and stops working, because you can run a beautifully functioning city at 10 million people, and you can run a dysfunctional city at 5 million people. So it depends. It's the match between what kind of infrastructure is in place to service the population. In terms of where migrants land, yes, put yourselves into the shoes of an international migrant. They don't know anything about Australia. They know like 2 or 3 cities by name. And when they first come to Australia, they know exactly one address. And that address is either their university or it is their place of work. And so the migrants initially move as close as they can to that one address. So they hang out. Jobs and unis are mostly clustered in our CBDs. And so the new arriving migrants cluster at the center of town. After a couple of years, they talked enough to their classmates, to their colleagues. They hung around on weirdestate.com.au and they eventually figure out how the city works. And then they act like everyone else in the city and they largely segregate based on their income, based on their wealth. And then they distribute elsewhere. And then they might seek job opportunities elsewhere and act accordingly.
Are you seeing any specific shifts in housing type? As in, like, should we be, as a developer, putting that hat on for a second, should we be building more 1-bedroom units? Is that growing? Is there any, or should we still be building 4-bedroom houses? Like, what? Obviously, probably 4-bedroom houses is always going to be high demand, but you're seeing like 1-bedroom units, the demand for that growing, or what are you seeing?
Well, so this is a question of where am I looking, is the answer. So the migrants that come to Australia initially are overwhelmingly single or at best coupled. So it's 1 or 2 people, so they need relatively small dwellings. Yeah, they will live in the city center. So that means as migration continues to flow in, but so for 250,000 net new migrants, you don't need to have the equivalent amount of apartments because each year some of those migrants bugger off of their apartments and they move into the family formation stage to the outer suburbs. And so that leads us to the demographic element of what is the most attractive property type in the next decade. What we are doing for the next 12 years is we continue to push the biggest generation of them all, millennials, from the inner city hipster areas onto the urban fringe. What do I mean by this? Well, at the moment, still most millennials are only coupled up. So they live in Surrey Hills, in Brunswick, in Fortitude Valley in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. They now add 1.5 kids bit by bit to their hipster dwellings. These become like cramped with prams and cots and whatever. And so they need to find a large enough, a family-sized 3-4 bedroom dwelling. Where are those dwellings? Well, they're not in the inner city suburbs because they don't even exist there. Millennials can't do what their boomer parents have done in the past and move to the middle suburbs because their beloved boomer parents are still hogging the 3 and 4 bedroom stock as empty nesters. They were fantastic NIMBYs over the last decade, so they block development. So millennials need to jump to the urban fringe. It is guaranteed for the next 12 years that 3 to 4 bedroom dwellings on the urban fringe will see gigantic demand growth. Guaranteed.
Where's the urban fringe in your opinion? So if we talk Brisbane as an example, where's the urban fringe in your opinion? I mean, from a suburb. Let's go Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, because we'll talk about Gold Coast off camera because I don't want to give away our secrets. But what's the outer fringe?
The urban
fringe, sorry.
The urban fringe is wherever you look at and you find enough land to bulldoze and build housing quickly. So this is why we sprawl out. If you look at something like Melton or Wyndham in Melbourne, this is just gigantically far away from the CBD, but you have plenty of land to bulldoze.
Yeah.
Bit of a broader strategic problem there is that we now bulldoze valuable farmland on the urban fringe. Mm-hmm. We are still a farming superpower, agriculture superpower. We are one of the 4 largest exporters of food in the world. We should remain to be this, so we shouldn't sacrifice land, to be honest, at the rate that we do, because it will continue to make us money, because global food prices will escalate. Terrible news for the bottom 2 billion people of this planet, but great news for a food exporter like Australia. So that's a strategic mismatch. We bulldoze valuable farmland, we're not creating more farmland. So that's a problem. But that's how our cities grow, because we're not adding more Gold Coasts.
Yeah.
We continue to add our population into just the same few cities.
And in Brisbane, would you say the likes of, say, like Logan, North Lakes, Burpengary, North as an example, Logan, Yarrabilba, Ripley, all these super...
Just look at a map and you see that there is land to bulldoze. And then you, in a sense, what the problem here is that we build property first and then worry about infrastructure, because the private sector develops faster than the public sector. So we then have this kind of gigantic problem in Australia where we play infrastructure catch up. Yep. Wherever you look at it, varies a bit, but I think it's fair to roughly estimate that we have an infrastructure backlog of about 20 years in this country. And you then go, well, no problem, let's just play catch up. Let's just build more infrastructure. We could theoretically build infrastructure faster than we add population, and so sooner or later we catch up. But it's such an inefficient and expensive way of building infrastructure. It is much cheaper to build infrastructure in the build it and they will come type way, where you start with infrastructure and then you add housing. If you ever played SimCity on a computer, that's how you would do it, by the way. But we don't do this because, politically speaking, you can't pull it off. Infrastructure in this country is a political game, where a political party decides what stuff gets built, and they then are being judged by the public on the success of this thing and by the existence of this thing in the first place. So if you ever were to build infrastructure to this future development site, where you'll put tens of thousands of people there, it is the most efficient, cheapest, most effective way of adding infrastructure to this country. It serves the good of the most number of people. You can't do it. Because if you were to do this, the existing voters with an infrastructure backlog, they would hate you and they would not vote for you. So this system dictates inefficient use of infrastructure. Also, it allows infrastructure costs to escalate. Because if I am assigning my name, my political fortunes to ensure that, let's say, the Melbourne suburban rail loop gets built, which needs to be built, absolutely a must that this thing gets built, but it turns out to be stupendously expensive. And so I'd say, well, I'd rather build this at whatever cost so that I have something to open, to cut a ribbon. That is important. And so therefore, the political class becomes compliant in inefficient infrastructure. Because if the infrastructure was built by, let's say, Infrastructure Australia, and the political system only dictates the amount of amount of money that gets spent on infrastructure, then Infrastructure Australia gets to decide this is the first priority, second priority, and the political leaders would actually be there to critically watch over the infrastructure rather than to push it through at all costs and therefore allow inefficiencies in the system. It is a terrible systemic problem that we have, and it's not as easy as saying this or that political leader is a moron. Let's get rid of this moron and then everything is solved. It's not that. We would need systemic change to provide more efficient infrastructure. I think it is high time to do so, because we just keep running behind the times, and it is quite frustrating to look at.
Well, I mean, I've been here 18 years now. It's been the same thing in 18 years with no changes, and I'm not sure what it was like, 30, 40, 50 years ago, but I'm sure there wasn't much change. Like we're building highways, 25 years after we need them.
We have wonderful stories and examples of short-sighted infrastructure decisions in the past. So I remember my first day in Australia, 1st of February 2008. Went to Melbourne Uni. This is where I studied first when I came here. And so Melbourne Uni is, of course, smack bang in the center of town. And so uni hadn't started yet, so I just went for a walk. And I walked around, there's Princess Park, and then I came across a level crossing. It blew my little mind that in the middle of a big fat city, there's a level crossing. I actually couldn't believe it. It's there. And now, decades after we built this level crossings, this thing would have been 50, 60 years old. We are now replacing them at the cost of billions. Because some lazy bastard decades ago was too cheap to build a bit of a tunnel, a bit of an overpass. These short-sighted decisions in the past cost you dearly in the future. And at some point, we must decide what we want the future of this country to look like. And you can play this game right now, because it is an utterly plausible scenario that we double the Australian population by the turn of the century. So 2100, 2104 or 5 or something like this, next 70 to 80 years, we will probably double the country from 27.5 to 55 million people. And this is the, play along at home game here. Where do you want to put those 27.5 million new Australians? You decide. if we were to take this growth potential, this growth story seriously, we would think about this and we would put infrastructure in place, or at least earmark land corridors for this infrastructure right now, so that we do not end up doing just the same mistakes that we've done over the last century in the next century.
So if you were the PM and pretend we're in North Korea, you can do whatever you like. You don't have to worry about anything else. What are the key things that you're actually doing? Obviously, you've spoken a lot about infrastructure, but if there's like three fundamental shifts you'd want to see happen, knowing what you know and the place that you play in, what would they be?
Well, so let's start with infrastructure. I would say looking forward, I would recognize that we double the country. I would then think about where would we want to live. And I'd say, well, we probably want to hug the coastline. That's what people want to do. And then think, well, we can't just double every city. Also, a Melbourne and a Sydney shouldn't be doubled. They already are kind of at capacity the way they function at the moment. So let's say we only times 1.5 them. Perth, mostly a functional mining city, times 1.5 is plenty. That means plenty of cities along the eastern seaboard where most of the people would want to live. The existing cities don't need to double, they need to triple or quadruple. And we need to add about 6-7 new Gold Coasts along the eastern seaboard. That's where the people would want to be. That means that at some point in the future, not today, but at some point in the future, the fast rail corridor that we talk about from Melbourne or even from Adelaide all the way up to North Queensland, that becomes an absolute must. It's financial nonsense right now, but if we acknowledge that it becomes a necessity at some point in the future, we earmark the corridor right now, we say no building on here, and then we bit by bit introduce this infrastructure. If we don't do this, we build like piecemeal crappy infrastructure at some point in the future that slows down growth. We could do this better. So that's part of, Simon Kuestenmacher, Chairman Kuestenmacher narrative here. This is infrastructure. The other one is about broader social engineering, and it is my broad belief that Australia wants to be and is better off if it is a middle-class country. And if most people, when they think about Australia, they still think and picture a bell curve. They think about Australia having a couple of rich people, sure, a couple of poor people. But overall, we are this egalitarian middle-class wonderland that calls itself Australia. What we are thinking of here in technical terms is called the 1960s. We look very, very differently. Our society looks increasingly like a letter U, where we have more and more high-income earners, more and more low-income earners, and an ever-shrinking, shriveling, eroding middle class.
Yeah.
That has heaps of implications. From a social cohesion perspective, this is very difficult to measure, to manage. We segregate those people physically. The rich and poor Australia, they don't meet ever. They have no idea. The only place where they could potentially meet is sports. So sports is outrageously important because by loving and hating the same footy team, by being in the stadium, yelling for or against a team, that creates bonds between people of different socioeconomic backgrounds. On your street today, you might think it's also diverse where you live because your neighbors, they have different skin colors, different languages they speak. They might even have a different sexual orientation. But overall, everyone on your street is just as rich or as poor as you are. Your kids go to a school where everyone is just as rich or as poor as they are. And so we create this Australia of rich and poor. They don't see each other and they have no idea what the other half of Australia feels like. Very difficult to spend public money in this setting as well. So I would do anything that I could think of to prop up the Australian middle class. I think we're better off this way. Part of this is doing something, and this sounds very populist almost. I would try to tax as much as I can wealth and consumption rather than income. Income tax keeps you poor. So there would be one way around this. You would do this, of course, not in some radical, crazy, revolutionary swoop. This would be slow, piecemeal transition. And of course, I would also make TAFE degrees universally free. It is one of the big scandals of the last century that we charged people for a TAFE degree, because a TAFE degree tended to be, and still is, the entry ticket to the Australian middle class. But by putting a hurdle in there, in front of it through a fee, some people didn't jump this hurdle and they stayed below. But some people also looked at this hurdle and they went, oh, screw this. I might as well go to uni. And so we are now over-educating Australia. Not in a philosophical sense. Like you and I, we are all too dumb. We don't read enough. We don't think enough.
Mhm.
We're not as smart as we theoretically could be. We're not utilizing our best intellectual potential. But we are over-educating Australia. 54% or thereabouts of our year 12s go to the university system.
And like this is another thing I want to go down is the cost of living and stuff as well. I agree. Like we are sitting as a nation, especially the Western world, and how fast technology is coming in AI and the rest of it. A lot of these things that people, a lot of these topics and subjects that are being learned in universities now will become obsolete very, very, very quickly, in my opinion. And you look at people that are going to university, they go to university because, in my opinion, society has taught them to go to university. The TV shows, the movies, well done, throw the grad hat, right? Wear the grad coat. It's a thing, right? Like walking your daughter down the aisle. It's that same type of thing that we've been kind of conditioned to think about. And in my opinion, those people are coming out of university and with a lot of debt, right, that they're paying off. Again, to me, it's a scam. It's a business. It's designed. I shouldn't say it's a scam. It's designed that way, in my opinion. And then eventually, these people's jobs are going to be at risk.
Well, you want to think about the role of education. And you go, well, if education is somehow linked to the workforce, you go, well, cool. If we send 54% of our kids to the university system, surely we operate an economy that requires 54% of people to go to university. We don't. Remember that we make our money as a country with mining,
Education.
agriculture, tourism, and a bit of education. We don't need 54% of us to go to university. Less would be okay. That creates economic inefficiencies because we, of course, pay as a society and as the individual student for this university education. That means we only start entering the workforce at scale in our mid-20s rather than taking some of these uni students and push them through the TAFE system where we get them into the workforce sooner and with less debt. So this would be economically much more efficient. And so I would say universal free TAFE will help to correct the system.
Is this a reason why we have such, do we have such, right? A trade shortage? Like, I feel like there's a trade shortage, but is there? And is there a reason? Is that a reason why? Because people are going, well, if I'm going to go do TAFE, I might as well just go to university. Or again, is it because we're changing as a society? Because let's put it this way, being a trade is hard work. Being a bricklayer is hard work. Installing flooring is hard work. Being a concreter or steel fixer is hard work. And I feel like as a society, we're becoming lazier because of technology and mobile. And again, like you said, we should probably be running more and we should probably be standing up instead of sitting down while we're doing this podcast and so on and so forth.
Yeah, next podcast will be walk and talk. I got your message. No, but yes, you are not imagining the trade shortage. So that is absolutely real. And that is one of the reasons why tradies earn good money at the moment. It is not that all of a sudden we decided, Sparkies really need to have a pay rise. It is just that we realized, damn, there are no Sparkies, no plumbers around. We should actually, it's just the market reacting to this because you still need them. And so, in a sense, if we were to make TAFE universally free and we create more tradies, this would not be overly welcomed by the existing tradies because their wages would go down. They wouldn't plummet or anything, but they wouldn't increase as much as they would in a shortage. So the shortage is always in the interest of the existing professionals, if that makes sense. This is why a medical college, the people who hand out the amount of dermatology experts or something, they have a severe interest in keeping this profession undersupplied. And that's a problem that we have in the trades. I'd say it's such an obvious shortage and bottleneck in the country that universal free TAFE should be on the top of the list for most politicians, for both major parties. I think it actually is. So I'm very, very optimistic about pushing more trades through. And of course, we now you mentioned the narrative before there is the narrative of you have to go to university stems from the boomer parents of the millennials today, because only a relatively small cohort, 20, 25%, whatever it is, of boomers went to university. The ones that did go to uni did exceptionally well. They got rewarded with nice and high incomes throughout their careers. They did well. So this means that those boomers who did go to uni told their kids, guys, you need to go to uni. But it also leads to the high school classmates of those boomers who didn't go to uni go like, kids, I didn't go to uni, but my mate did. So you better go to uni. So therefore, we just told everyone to go to uni. And statistically speaking, it actually still makes sense. It is still the best indicator for your future income of how educated you are. So education still translates into a higher income, at least on average. It is bizarre. We do, of course, know a couple of tricks to increase your income if you're a tradie. The single best trick is to become a sole trader or a business owner. That on average gives you a income boost of 27% throughout your lifetime, which is essentially like getting the income of an additional decade of your working life. So becoming your own boss, absolutely crucial. Make it or break it type career skill, which of course then tells me that if I was to advise some sort of young lad, go like, well, what should you do with your life? I'd say, well, consider a trade, but very much make sure that you become your own boss and that you potentially employ another worker or two. That of course means that while you might not need to go to university, you need to go to your own little MBA. You need to learn how to run a business. You need to do all the boring math stuff where you actually balance your own books, which is an absolute nightmare. Everyone hates it. You complain about hard work laying bricks, but every brickie hates the paperwork much more than laying the bricks.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of advice, I think, for some of the young people. There's, of course, still the individual life journey that you're on. Some people are definitely better destined for a university type career. So pick that. But overwhelmingly, I think as a country, we're over-educating ourselves. Sorry, quick.
Yeah. If I gave you $1 million today, and
I would say thank you.
but I forced you,
It's very generous, and I know you well.
but I forced you to buy a property. I'm assuming there'll be some plus sides to your skill set, knowing, where there's going to be supply and demand. Log jams, I suppose. So where are you parking that $1 million? If there's a competition and we're coming back in 12 months' time to see whose $1 million has gone up the most, where are you going to park?
So
Where does Simon invest?
I cannot tell you where the best investment is. I can tell you where demand will be. Whether this translates into a good investment is another question.
You sound like a politician.
Exactly. This is the legal asterisk. This is not financial advice kind of thing.
His lawyer is listening, boys.
No, but so where the biggest demand will be. So I have two cities that I'm big fan of: Geelong and the Gold Coast.
I've heard of Geelong. Yeah, people
Because
talk.
these are increasingly becoming cities in their own right. They continue to be overflow destinations. The Gold Coast is a retirement destination, which Geelong really isn't at the same degree. So Geelong also now creates a bit of hits areas in terms of how much it can expand. That drives up prices. So everything pushes people there, which is nice to know. What I'm, of course, a huge fan of as a demographer is anything that smells like aged care or retirement living. Because we don't really are aware of this in Australia, because we hear so often stories about Australia's aging. So we kind of like just gaze over these kind of narratives. We are doubling the 85 plus cohort in the next 15 years. And that is absolutely insane, because half of the 85 plus cohort needs care on a daily basis. This means we need to double the aged care sector in 15 years. So anyone who has an aged care thing going for them in 15 years will have absolutely bonkers demands. There's so much demand that prices for aged care will escalate like crazy. So you can charge whatever the hell you want for your aged care services, because ultimately only the top 2/3 of society that need aged care will be able to receive aged care. Price escalation pushes the bottom third completely out of the market, which makes sure that all the remaining players in the market will have a absolute gem of a time. So from a pure investment perspective, aged care, while it is difficult to staff, finding aged care staff is very, very difficult. You, of course, operate big and complex operations, but the demand will be there, the price will be there. It'll be absolutely juicy property time.
We'll delete that off the pod, that section. I don't want too many people on it.
Eric's just working out how he's going to start an aged care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. I would.
Can I ask quickly outside of property? I know we're in property. Then you were just talking about investments and where to go. What other investments do you look at around the place that you keep an eye on? Your shares or Bitcoin or crypto, Bitcoin?
Well, so if you ask the crypto question,
I've just
I'm not an expert there at all, but I would always look at any kind of investment at where could this go? Where is the moon? And could this go to zero? And it's utterly plausible in my absolutely unknowledgeable mind that cryptocurrency, something like Bitcoin, could go to zero.
Yeah.
You believe it or you don't believe it?
I think it is plausible
Okay.
that it could go. So there is a massive risk investing in it because it can go to zero. If I imagine a supercomputer that can all of a sudden decrypt a cryptocurrency, this thing becomes essentially worthless. And so there is a risk. Maybe some technical guys will throw into the comments why I'm very, very wrong about this. But of course, it's a limited currency that at the moment everyone tries to believe in. You have massive institutions investing in it. So you have more and more centralized investors buying it, even though it's a decentralized currency. So the market wants it to be expensive. Yeah. And so I'd say, well, you probably can be part of this ride and make a good buck with it. But at the moment, most people playing in this field are what I would consider squiggly line investors. They only want the squiggly line to go up and then make a good buck out of it. There are, of course, some true crypto believers who tell you about this is a decentralized money system and it's wonderful and so forth. But ultimately, the way that I'm seeing crypto being used outside of investment, it's rather dodgy. It's still used to wash money. It's still for illegal transactions and so forth. So I'm not convinced on it just yet. Will it go up? Probably. But again, that is the most unknowledgeable person that you will ever have on this podcast talking about this. But I just always like the idea, can something go to zero? And the property investment probably won't go to zero, for example. Yeah, so that's, it's quite like,
So you're thinking in the worst case scenario, what's it backed by? Like property's always going to have a value because it's an asset. It is something. It's a physical form. It's land. Whereas a crypto is not. That's your thought
It's not.
process behind
The
that.
worst case scenario is it is absolutely nothing and it is worth zero. So that can happen. So I like the general investment advice to say invest as much in crypto as you are comfortable losing. Right? So if it is $10,000 that you're willing to lose, throw that into crypto. If it is $100,000 that you're happy to lose, do that. If it then accrues wealth and makes you beautifully rich, well done. And so I think that's the idea of investments, is that you know that you have no right for this investment to go up. You are gambling on the future, and your gamble of the future, you need to have a certain kind of range of scenarios that you consider. And for example, I think one mistake that we make in investments, if I think that's something like property, is that we think we have a right for this investment to go up. You don't. You think, and I think rightfully so, that you say this investment will go up in value. So that's a good investment then. But to be all sad and cry when your investment goes down, that makes no sense to me. Because this just means that you misread the political environment. And then you just suck as an investor, and you just need to suck it up and deal with it. But so the kind of entitlement that you have in an investment, you say, but the government better make sure that my investment is, I think that's pathetic. This is you reading the future. It is a rather big thing. You're like, well, I buy Coca-Cola share because I think I like this drink and many people do too. And so this should be worth something. That's fair, but don't cry if all of a sudden Coke goes broke.
So a bit of a sideways question. I just wanted to see your thoughts on it.
Cost of living. I mean, we're in a housing crisis, and in my opinion, and many others, we're in a cost of living crisis. And there's a lot of people out there. The narrative is doing it tough, and I mean, everything has gone up dramatically, right? Whether you're wealthy, whether you're not wealthy, at the end of the day, we're pumping the same fuel, we're drinking the same milk, we're eating the same bread. Unless it's sourdough and it's fancy, but you know what I mean. Where are we heading for the people listening to this, we got some people that are listening that are trying to make ends meet. They're trying to look for, like, I mean, our podcast is called Unemployable, right? So we're trying to get people to think outside of the box, because in my opinion, your university degree that's going to earn you your $200,000 a year and you're going to ride off to the sunset is no longer. I have personal friends, we have acquaintances, that are on very high income, that aren't living a very high income luxury lifestyle like they probably would have been 10 years ago. Everything has escalated so much. Where is it going? Is in your opinion, where is this cost of living going? I always talk to people, they're like, nothing ever comes down. So there's a heading.
It doesn't come down. And part of this, again, is by design. So if you think about, we discuss in the cost of living increase, and we'd always talk about the tax creep, where all of a sudden our tax brackets, they are just set in stone, and through inflation, more and more of us are put into higher and higher income brackets. So that then makes sure that you have less money to spend. This is by design, the bracket creep, because again, we rely as a government, as a federal government, 50-something% is income tax. So we now have big cohorts of baby boomers retire. You have a smaller dependency ratio, meaning fewer workers for the non-working population. And they go, oh, damn it, we need to tax those people more. And we are not, how are we taxing them? Well, mostly through income tax. So that bracket creep is definitely by design. This is not an oversight. We want to push this out there. We could change it. But in order to change this, we would need to make sure that income tax is less important. So that means something else must be important. And that's something else, whatever we tax, will have a lot of people lobbying against that. And so we don't do it because it is hard. So therefore, from that perspective, where are we going, you ask? Well, it will continue to go up. You will continue to see more pressures. Because how do we drive prices down? Well, we could drive property-related costs down, which is your rent and your mortgage. And if you create a scenario in your head for, we say on next Tuesday, your rent or your mortgage, whatever you have, is 50%. It's half price. And you would be heaps better off. Fuel prices wouldn't worry you. The higher beer prices in the pub, you don't care about this. All of a sudden, all your worries are essentially solved by just cutting this particular cost in half, just as a thought experiment. That, of course, won't happen. We could do a similar experiment with the high energy costs that we have in this country, which is an absolute bizarre thing, because we talk about so many things that we want that are linked to energy being dirt cheap. We want life to be more affordable, so therefore energy would need to be cheaper. That would make, mom and dads have a bit more money in their pockets. That would be nice. It also would allow us to increase our manufacturing sector. I mean, we talk about something like the National Manufacturing Strategy, which is great. It's a good document. It makes perfect sense to value add manufacturing in our export sector. It's good stuff. That means our value added export sectors are mining and agriculture. So we could smelter steel, aluminum, we could create steel here, we could create more food here, we don't export live animals, we make steaks here, whatever. But all of these things are stupendously energy extensive. And so if energy is half the cost, a third of the cost, all of a sudden those plants would be feasible. But energy isn't as cheap.
Is that by design?
I would say, well, it's not so much by design, but oversight. We talk about and I'm quoting the Australia Institute here, the lefty think tank, about the Grace gas road of Australia. So we do not tax our gas export decently. Qatar and Australia roughly create the same amount of natural gas, and Qatar earns something, someone looked this up online, I think it's something like 32, 37 times as much tax dollars from their exports. And of course, we'd say, yes, they produce things cheaper because slave labor is nice and cheap, and environmental regulations probably aren't as strict as they are here. And so I'd say, well, we should earn less than they do, but not by that order of magnitude. So that is a gigantic scandal that we don't do this. So the whole narrative that we say we have private companies pumping out gas, selling gas, because we couldn't possibly have a state-owned company doing this. Even if we had an absolute shocker of a gas company, state-owned gas company, Moron Gas Incorporated, if they were doing this, we would still make more money than we do at the moment.
Why wouldn't we tax them?
Well, this is all with contracts and
Deals,
deals.
deals
and
that have
it's
been done. that
probably
What incentive does?
someone's making money,
Yeah,
just not us.
and that's a scandal, because you can also push narratives that are not useful anymore. We say the gas industry creates jobs. I'm utterly unimpressed by anyone who says that they are creating jobs, because my main demographic reading is that we run out of workers. So a politician that says I'm building that thing to create 100,000 jobs, whatever it is, I'm not impressed. I see this as a liability. So that's a major risk. I've done this fun analysis on a Saturday night yet again during the pandemic years, when you remember the pandemic. So we didn't know how the economy was going to play out. We took this dip, and we talked about potentially there will be this V-shaped recovery where we bounce up. This actually turned out to be the case. And so we weren't sure that this was going to happen. So we said, we know what to do to stimulate the economy. We do public spending. And so every state wrote wonderful infrastructure projects into their budgets. And then one Saturday night, I sat down, downloaded all those infrastructure budgets, and you just have to giggle, because you know it can't possibly all be built. There are nowhere near enough workers in this country to pull it all off. That's how severe the skills shortage is in this country.
Mm.
Where is Australia going as a country, or is it going as a society with this housing crisis, cost of living crisis? We've got they just met a week ago or so ago, talking about how they're going to increase taxes and lobbying different ideas, and wealth tax and superannuation, unrealized capital gains tax, and all. And I personally know lots of people that are packing bags and leaving, wealthy people leaving. And there's other countries that are doing a better job, in my opinion, on infrastructure, incentivizing. Do you see this from the demographic point of view as a trend that will keep continuing, or is this just kind of a little blip in the road?
I think quite a bit of this is panic, and is people being a bit overly dramatic. You want to think about the business model of Australia. We will continue to be just fine. Around the world, whatever kind of scenario you create of trade wars, whatever, our business model continues to deliver success. We are one of very, very precious few economies, developed economies, that offer guaranteed population economic growth in the future. We'll be right. We will continue to be the lucky country. Population will want to come our way, and international investments want to come our way. We sometimes make it a bit harder for money to come our way than it should be. Absolutely agreed. But there's no need to panic. Australia will not be a downtrodden basket case of an economy at any point in time. So I remain very, very optimistic. I would, of course, want to see efficiencies here. I would want to make sure that we diversify our economy a bit more. But again, in order to diversify the economy, we need to do two things. Energy needs to be much, much cheaper. So I want a politician that says, I'm cutting energy costs in half. This is my the hill I'm going to die on. This is the most important policy that I'm going to do. Will this be green energy? Will it be whatever? To a certain degree, even as a environmentalist, I don't care about it, because this is absolutely crucial for the future of this economy. Any kind of fossil fuel profit that we make, we could happily increase the stuff that we dig out of the ground, and then do the Norwegian approach and force the spendings of this sale to be transformed into new renewable energy sources. Norway's doing it to great success. We could do the same. We don't do it because it's politically, it sounds too woo-woo greedy for the liberals. The Greens think this is environmental destruction. If we do anything, mining, no new coal, no new gas kind of narratives. So nobody's touching this. So that would be an absolute wonderful way of making the economy more productive. And of course, if we think about things like, well, in theory, Australia is and remains a hyper attractive lifestyle destination for any footloose industry. Why should any kind of research laboratory or any kind of tech company be in the US? They might as well be here. Same difference. Energy costs for high expensive data centers, that makes us less attractive, but it's also the housing costs. So as a future techie worker, you want to live in one of our big cities. They're stupendously expensive, so let's not do it. If housing was cheaper, energy were cheaper, we could diversify the economy.
I just feel like, obviously, for someone like you, who's obviously successful demographer, doing 119 conferences, not 120, because you still want to be married. Off camera, someone was saying we have, what was the joke, that if you do 120,
You can do 120 conferences before you get divorced.
so he says he does 119. Obviously successful, making money in business, you're not paying, the 45% on the top tax bracket because you'll be structured in certain ways, and the rest of it. Like talking to the, nurse, talking to the school teacher that are on these fixed incomes. And again, the price of milk is the price of milk. The price of fuel is the price of fuel. The tax creep, like people are feeling the pinch, and I'm feeling like people, like, yes, there is certain successes that people are having in this country, like Shannon and Carson, and that are grabbing the bull by the horns and the developing land, but they're putting their kahunas on the line, man. Like it's high risk, high reward. People that are investing in Bitcoin, right? High risk, high reward. People that are investing in startups and businesses, and not, again, by design, not everyone is meant to be like this. So for the people that are on an average wage, like, what is the future for them? Like, what can they do? Like, what are you seeing in the demographics? They're obviously, you said they're not spending less in regards to their lifestyle, but what are they going? They got to go without somewhere. What are you seeing in the data?
So
Right.
the bottom third of society most certainly curbs the spending. So that's definitely true, because you just don't have more money.
You don't have
You have a very fixed cost for rent and so forth. And these are people who decide between turning on heating, medicine, food. These are, we call this the wallet shift. You shift money around in your wallet because you need to make those hard decisions. And one of the big difficulties here is that everyone, even the top third, the top 1%, feels that life is getting more expensive. So you therefore feel that you know what's happening at the bottom. But what is happening at the bottom is completely different to what is happening at the top. The idea of life just not making sense. My general broad advice for a low to middle income earner is to get the hell out of Melbourne and Sydney and don't ever go back. These cities are not working for you. Why are you dedicating your life to those cities? Those cities are mistreating you. This country has minimizing the social and affordable housing stock radically for decades. We're not building more social housing at the same rate that we should. This is ridiculous. This is something that I would vote against with my feet. This country works beautifully on a high income. Easy. Even though you might complain about milk and fuel and whatever, but ultimately it actually delivers security, lifestyle, safety, blah, blah, blah. It's great stuff. But for the bottom third, this is getting harder. And that sooner or later will have political implications.
Do you feel like that bottom third is starting to creep up in that second third?
The bottom third increasingly gets loud and angry and disappointed, and they will feel that the system doesn't work for them. And you also, of course, now have a big generational shift where the millennial generation for the first time knows for certain that they will be less well off than their parents. And so you have all those forces in society that feel that the system isn't working for them. And the system is, of course, this vague sense that you feel it isn't working for you. But ultimately, this translates in you questioning parts of the system. There's something like capitalism, democracy. So all of a sudden, you question those big anchors that created this society and made it prosperous and wonderful to live in. And so we then risk very much to throw the baby out with the bathwater as we rejig that system. That is a real risk. And so as a wise political economic system, we would try to push the bottom third up. We would try to do this rather quickly before any kind of problems emerge.
Revolution.
Yeah, not so much.
No.
We're not talking about guillotines on the streets or anything, but well, maybe just machetes and shopping centers. But
350,000
steel containers.
by design. By design. I want to wrap this up by asking, what are some surprising trends, if any, that you're seeing currently in demographic in this country? Is there anything that's surprising you that, like, obviously, the V-shaped recovery from COVID, that you might have not thought that would have happened? Is there anything happening right now that seems odd? Because when I talk to people, it's like, but affordability is at, record highs, and housing crisis, like the economy's average, and yet there's still a lot of people making money. Property prices are continuing to go up, like Shannon, Carson, myself, we're in business, we're doing deals. There's so much opportunity, but then there's this whole narrative of no opportunity.
Well, I guess one of the most surprising demographic tidbits out there is that we are seeing the very fast reversal of the gender pay gap. So we're not even talking about the closing of the gender pay gap. At the youngest ages, we are now seeing a reverse gender pay gap where women out-earn men. And that comes...
It's about time.
It's a simple reflection of education. Remember that I said earlier that the best indicator for your future income is your level of education. And women are outperforming men at every level of education by a long shot. It's not even close. And so it's hardly a surprise now that in many graduate intakes, the women earn more than men because they come into this new year of grad intake with one more qualification, with better grades. So they earn more. And kind of cool that's fair, and it's actually just a fair compensation of your work and your effort, because ultimately you reward the inputs, you reward how much somebody brings to the table. But what we have not seen yet is a reverse of dating behavior. So we know from all the online dating platforms that women still engage in what is called upwards social mobility of women. This is just a weird, unnecessarily long-winded way of saying women want a partner that is richer or more educated than they are, or at least as rich or at least as educated as they are. This comes back from the olden days when women were locked out of the workforce, they were discriminated against, and the only chance for a woman to earn more money is to marry up. And so now we still have the women that are now outperforming men on income, education, filtering for men that are higher educated and richer than they are. That gives those women a very shallow dating pool. And the more successful you are as a woman, the more difficult it is to find a man that is even more successful. So therefore, if you find a successful woman who says there's just no good men out there, she's technically correct.
It's gonna be the sugar mama.
Yeah,
Got a whole bunch of guys now changing their dating profile.
Yeah.
The issue is that there won't be a sugar mama, because she goes, I'm not going to be the sugar mama. I don't need somebody. I don't need to feed this guy through. I want this higher dude. So this means that you have two cohorts of undateable people. The first one are highly successful career women who, some of them are undateable. They can't be matched. So they just become more economically productive. So I'm not too worried about them as a social force. But you also have the uneconomically productive, uneducated men. And they are then undateable. They feel sexually frustrated, and we know this for a fact, they start voting for radical parties. This is the incel, the involuntary celibate movement, and so forth. And these people are political kindling. These people radicalize society. By the way, if you play a guessing game like, will sexual assaults go up or down? Well, be my guest in guessing what's happening. But I would say this stuff should go up over time.
I'll let them know AI bots will be here soon.
Maybe there's that kind of stuff that might allow you to blow off some steam, so to speak.
I love it. Well, we all got daughters on this panel. I don't know if you have kids or not, but that's a good sign.
Two unemployable boys.
Yeah, two unemployable boys. There you go. And I just want to finish it off with one last question, and this has to do with interest rates. I've been calling interest rates going down myself. Do you see this continuing, or do you see this kind of leveling off? What, in your opinion?
Purely demographically speaking, yes, there might be another interest rate cut very soon because of, we're back in inflation rate territory and so forth. That's nice. Demographically speaking, if I look ahead a decade, I see a decade of extremely high consumption in Australia because we pushed the biggest generation ever, the millennials, into the mid-40s. That is the highest spending phase of the life cycle. So millennials are going to spend every dollar that they have. So that's inflationary in nature. Also, the baby boomers, yes, we are retiring them, which back in the day would have made them a deflationary asset, because back in the day you stopped drawing a wage, you instantly turned into a poor penny pinching pensioner. But boomers are a different breed. They actually increase their spending in retirement in every category that we measure, except for charitable giving, that is down. But all the other cohorts, all the other measures, they actually increase their spending. So you have the richest and the biggest cohorts spending money like crazy. That is inflationary in nature. That means that the RBA probably needs to counteract this by relatively elevated interest rates for relatively longer periods of time. So the demographic setup suggests higher interest rates. There's, of course, more that feeds into interest rates than just the demographics, but I wouldn't bet on a decade of super low interest.
Mark, you might be onto something. So Mark's a guy that's on a podcast with us, and he's been saying that he reckons interest rates in the long term will be going up, not going down.
That's my man.
You guys are on the same page. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. We got 18 years, got 15 years in the property market. And hopefully we can make a bit of money doing that. We don't have to worry about it. And we'll be one of those baby boomers that'll just keep spending and skewing Simon's analytics.
Simon might be in by then and building Rome and waiting for him to come.
So good. Honestly, I can't believe we've been going for an hour and a half. It goes by so quick. I love this, these types of topics, and there's so much more that we can talk about. We'll have to get you back on at some point before the 18 years. But again, appreciate you coming. Obviously, we had you on prior, but it didn't work out, and you've made it happen again. So thank you very much. And Carson, thank you for making this happen. Yeah, appreciate you guys. And again, guys, like we always say at the end, subscribe, share, comment. This will really, really help us. I'm going to make sure Simon posts a photo of us on his X, because he's got about 250,000 followers, to say, come see Unemployable. Check these guys out. It's going to be on camera, so you better do it, Simon. But no, appreciate you guys. This is amazing, amazing information that all of you guys need to know. Demography, economics. It's a very, very dry topic for a lot of people, but in the numbers, there's money, right? And you can see that by someone like Simon and what he does. This is what this guy does full time, all day, every day. He gets flown around the world talking about these topics. So obviously they're very important. So make sure you share, like, subscribe. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.
Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that episode of Unemployable. If you'd like to watch another episode, just click there.